Hi there, coming back to you with a little bit more Walt Whitman before we move on. Talked a little bit about how even his portraiture marks a change in the way he wants to be seen as a writer, as how he sees the role of the American writer. He's an everyday guy doing his everyday thing. He doesn't, in some ways, even though he uses everyday speech, he will use high speech too, and everything in between. Um, Last thing I'll say is he also likes using long lists, and these can be very overwhelming sometimes. But, when in doubt, go back to the SIFT method. Just get all the way through it. If I stopped every time I didn't totally get something I read, and I used to do that, I would never finish a page. Sometimes you just got to kind of have to suspend and keep rolling forward. Come back and ask questions. It's like, when you're watching a movie with your grandparents or something like that, and they're constantly interrupting, and they're like, why is that person going into the blue car? I don't know what and you're like, oh, just watch it. It's going to all play out. You kind of have to do that with poetry too. No offense to anybody's grandparents. You know what? My 14-year-old son does it all the time. It's just like, wait, it's gonna unfold. We can talk about it afterwards if we need to, which is what we're going to do. Now, once again, one final point about Whitman. That was the frontispiece picture he chose. Think about how different that is from Longfellow's picture. And again, this is the kind of illustration. How did that happen? All right, you're going to watch me do this. Oh, this is the kind of illustration you would see in the front of a book. And this is so traditional. And this is nothing against Longfellow. I mean, he has a well established, place in the literary canon in the United States. Um, but he was very much of his time. And in some ways, Walt Whitman, like Emily Dickinson, even though they might not know it, they were looking ahead. They were trying something different. Maybe they didn't know they were going to be influential. Dickinson, maybe not so much. Whitman was a pretty good self-promoter. Um, so I think there's something to that. Okay, I'm going to do it a quick pause. I'm going to load up a little bit of work for us to look at regarding Mark Twain. Give me a pause. Boom, there he is. Mark Twain. Uh, Looks great in a white suit. Wears it with dignity. He's no Colonel Sanders. A lot of you know Mark Twain from previous readings of him. He's well anthologized in a lot of American education systems. But let's get a little bit of background information about him. He started off in the publishing industry as a printer's apprentice. So even as a young child, he's already getting his fingers dirty, literally, in the business. That old ink staining everywhere. And he was also a Mississippi riverboat pilot, and that's where the term Mark Twain comes from. Twain means two. Mark Twain means 12 feet deep? I can't remember. I am no merchant marine. He traveled extensively. He was born in Missouri, went to San Francisco and worked as a journalist and spent a lot of time there around the time of the gold rush. So he was exploring the new parts of America and the rapidly growing, tumorously growing parts of America, including the wild economic and financial distortions and the resultant social effects of the gold rush. But earned in his lifetime the fame of being one of America's best humorists and most cutting satirists. Um, his pen could cut you like a knife. And if you've only read Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn or Connecticut and King Yankee's Court, I Connecticut in King, a Yankee, a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. I'm not even going to re-record that. I'm moving forward. Um, you will find satire or you will find social criticism kind of layered through it. But the pieces I'm asking you to think about are ones that were published either very late in his life or posthumously after he died, because they were considered too much for his particular era. And Huckleberry Finn is really the large story that helped to prove to the American readership, perhaps to the global readership, that vernacular language, the regional language of a place, can be high art. You don't have to use the Queen's English or Shakespearean English or college educated English, the way it writes or the way it sounds, in order for something to be really powerful, moving, important art. And we see that all over the place with Huckleberry Finn. It's a great read. If you haven't read it, pick it up. It's pretty fun. I've been reading it. I used to read it to my kids when they were younger, and it's humorous. It's got enough going on that it keeps them interested, because Huck's always getting in all kinds of problems. It works on a lot of different audience levels. Good stuff. Might be my nomination for the Great American Novel. There are certainly others. Maybe Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. If you think if you got an opinion about what you think the Great American Novel is, I would love to hear that. I mean, throw it into the Remind or email me. Maybe we'll get a chat starting on it. That'd be really fascinating to hear. As far as his tone goes, he was not an optimist about human nature. You could tell he looks kind of grumpy. Like, he's got this look on his face like, no, I can't believe this shit. I mean, one can only imagine what he would be thinking about what's been happening recently in the United States. And although he was a religious and spiritual person, he was continuously disappointed and revolted by the contradictions and the hypocrisy of some people within the Western religious traditions. And going along with that, he did not suffer fools or hypocrites gladly. Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind throughout the semester is that when we get towards taking the quizzes and taking the final, I am going to ask you to come prepared with one more piece of information about every author that you discuss or identify and comment on. And that is what literary movement that they were associated with. Now, with Emily Dickinson, you could say perhaps transcendentalist poetry. I would accept that. If you wanted to say early modernist poetry, I would accept that. I would accept both of those for Whitman as well. I think transcendentalist poetry is going to be a little bit more on the nose. And for Mark Twain, realism, capital R. Remember, we talked a little bit about that in the introduction. It's this literary genre that's all about showing everyday people and representing things as they are. Satire realism, satirical realism, I would accept as well. There's more than one way to get to that answer. And I think being able to say, they're part of this movement, or we can group these people together, helps us understand those people and their traditions a little bit better. And it's not a perfect process. Every time you create a group, membership of that group adds something that it didn't intended and leaves out something it didn't intend. And we're going to have to be, aware of that and on the lookout for that. Going back to Fools and Hypocrites and his relationship to religion, yes, he was a religious person, but as you can see by the War Prayer and by Letters from the Earth, that he had a lot of trouble with what he saw to be the contradictions inherent in religion, and also the way people of power and charisma used religion to, to manipulate others, either for ambition or gain or fame or wealth or war or any combination of those things. And we see a little bit of that. We see a lot of that in the War Prayer, which is a really, really rough read if you think about it all the way to the end. But it came in a very jingoistic time in America's history during the Spanish-American War. Letters from the Earth takes on the relationship between humans and God within the Christian tradition. And again, it's talking more about the failures of humans than it is about religion in general. But, at one point, Lucifer is reporting back to his buddies who are still in heaven that, humanity is a nickel-plated angel at its best. At its worst, it is a sarcasm. I'd like you to think about that line. What does it mean if a person is a sarcasm? It's a very strange metaphorical construction, but it's going to stick with you. He also has this wonderful letter at the end that was written by Abner Schofield, who we would consider to be a corporate magnate of his day, talking about the difference between public praying and private praying. And we see that in the War Prayer as well. What you publicly pray for versus what you privately pray for, and how you act when nobody is watching. And that particular letter at the end, please make time to get to it, is scathing. Wonderful stuff. But what is satire? Let's talk about it. It's the use of irony, sarcasm, ridicule, or the like in exposing, denouncing, or deriding vice or folly. That's a good working definition. It's pointing out the flaws in human behavior or human nature, hopefully to change people's own nature and work towards something better. Satire is all over these two. And when Lucifer talks about what is in heaven versus what people really like, heaven gets represented as like being like in church. But he says most people don't like going to church all that much. All these things that humans love to do are left out of heaven. He even mentioned sex for a reason too. But you know what? It's interesting. Representing heaven is a much more challenging affair in a way. There are clouds, there are gates, there's the presence of God. But more than that, it kind of like moves out of focus unless you go with really old school traditional stuff. Hell, on the other hand, is very vivid. Not comfortable, not desirable, but more easy to portray. Same thing goes if you've ever read Paradise Lost, representations of heaven versus hell. God versus Lucifer there. If you haven't read it, oh my gosh, pick it up. And so I found this comic on the web here about what Satan was saying about heaven in Letters from the Earth. So here's a human. Excuse me, God, he's levitating. My son, is there a billiards table here? Do you really need a billiards table? Well, I guess not. And God kind of floats away. Then the human says, this sucks. Which is silly and stupid, but it kind of goes to like the contradiction about what humans tell to each other heaven will be like versus what humans really like doing. And that's a great place to end it. Once again, enjoy your reading. Enjoy writing those discussions. I've been loving reading your info. If you got any questions, please, please, please contact me on Canvas Inbox or on Remind. Try to stay away from my Chaffey address because I just get loaded down with stuff and I don't want to miss your emails. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.